Hello everyone, welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host Paula Taylor, I forgot my name. I'm your host Paula Taylor and this is episode 115. So tonight I'm really excited about this episode. This came to me kind of in a stroke of intuition the other day. I'm going to tell you the story of how the Grinch overcame trauma. But I have a couple quick announcements, just housekeeping to get out of the way. So if you are enjoying the show, there's a couple ways you can support me. You can leave comments on the Facebook post. You can rate it where you get your podcasts. And you can also support the show financially by going to paulataylorenergy.com, click on the podcast tab, and then donate to me directly through PayPal. There's also a link in the show notes for that link, as well as to donate through Anchor, which is the host of my podcast. So I'm really excited about tonight's show. As I said, this came to me kind of as in a stroke of intuition as I was walking around my pool. I've put aside time to communicate with my guides, which I've talked about a little bit on social media and in last week's show. And so in one of those times that I put aside to receive intuitive information, I got this kind of stroke of intuitive genius. And let me tell you, I like to always tell you kind of where this came from in my life. And then we're going to go through the story. I'm going to tell you the story of how the Grinch overcame trauma. But I was sitting on my couch a few weeks ago, and there's something going on in my personal life that it directly affects me, but it's not my story to tell. So I'm not going to share details like I usually do. But there's kind of a situation going on in which I realized, I didn't really realize this, there's a person that is in my life that I've had a hard time with for a long time. It's somebody that I just didn't feel really good when I was around. And so I've been having a hard time because the power dynamics in this relationship have kind of shifted. And I was sitting on the couch and I was like, why can I not have compassion for this person? Like, that is what I teach, like love and compassion. And I'm usually pretty well practiced at it, you know, and no one's perfect, of course, but I was sitting there and I was like, I just cannot find that compassion for this person. And so I started questioning, like, why is this? And all of a sudden it kind of came to me that this is a situation in which I was traumatized. I never thought about it that way. This person was fairly abusive to me emotionally. And so as a result of that, I was holding this trauma in my body from these experiences that I had had over a period of years. And trauma is all about safety. It's all about staying safe. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, or today. I guess technically it's today. I'm used to saying tonight. And so as I started to view this through a lens of trauma, I started realizing, like, I can't think about this other person in this situation because I'm totally self-focused. And that's a little bit what trauma does to us. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And it's not about selfishness per se. It's really about, am I safe? Because I was in a situation where I either physically wasn't safe or I didn't feel safe. And so when you have been traumatized and you're holding trauma in relationship, especially to a person, to a situation, when that situation or person comes back into your experience, automatically, without thinking about it, the reaction of the body is, I'm not safe. I'm not safe with this person. And as we've talked about a lot on the show, our bodies have to be in ease to feel that love, to feel that compassion, to call that into our space. And so as soon as I sort of viewing this situation like, oh, this is a situation in which I am a trauma survivor and I am looking at everything through the lens of my own safety. And as soon as I realized that, I was able to let that go. And then what happened is I felt like my heart grew 3 sizes. That's the wording that came to me. I felt the compassion rush in and the love rush in, and I felt my heart space kind of open and grow. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, and it made me think of the story of the Grinch and how his heart grew 3 sizes. And I thought everybody knows that story, but I went back and I watched the original cartoon from 1966. And there was so much in it. When I looked at it through a lens of trauma, I was just like, this is the best story ever of somebody overcoming trauma. So I decided that I wanted to tell the story of how the Grinch overcame trauma. So that's what we're going to do today. And I don't own the copyright to the Grinch, so this is all paraphrasing. I'm not reading out of the book. We're just going to kind of go through the story, and we're going to look at this story as I did through this lens of trauma. And it blew my mind when I started looking at this. It figuratively, I'm still alive, so it didn't literally blow my mind. It figuratively blew my mind. Energetically, it really opened up a lot of space for me. So at the very beginning of the story, we meet our Grinch, right? He's a mean one, Mr. Grinch. He's mean, he's nasty, and we don't know why he's nasty. And they even say, nobody was sure. Why was the Grinch so nasty? Maybe his shoes were too tight. And right away, that made me think about how trauma affects us. First of all, nobody knows what we've been through. Trauma is oftentimes held in secret. It's kept as a secret shame. We're going to get into that a little bit more too. And it also made me think about how everybody experiences trauma differently. Like two people could have the same exact event, and one person will hold that trauma. It will become trauma for them, and one person will process and release it. And that is why there is no such thing as comparative trauma. Because what might seem quote unquote little to one person might feel huge to someone. I also think that trauma is cumulative. So maybe the Grinch's shoes were too tight. Maybe he was abused at home as a child. Maybe he had a bad experience at Christmas and didn't receive the toy he wanted. There's all of these things that accumulate. That's what I mean by cumulative, and kind of add up to this huge triggered state, this being triggered by trauma state. It's usually not just one thing. It could be in a certain situation, but these things kind of accumulate in our energetic field. And the more they accumulate, the less room there is for movement, the less room there is for love, for compassion. So there's a couple of other clues that tell us that the Grinch, he wasn't just a mean guy, he was actually triggered by trauma. So the Grinch lived out by himself, away from everyone else. That is a huge sign of trauma. Isolating yourself from your surroundings is a huge sign of trauma. And why does that happen? And this is really important. That happens due to shame. That happens because at some point in the past, we were made vulnerable. Maybe we were vulnerable because we were children and we didn't really have defenses physically or emotionally yet. Or we allowed ourselves to be vulnerable, and that was used against us in some way. Shame and vulnerability are opposites. Vulnerability is also the antidote to shame. But vulnerability is extremely hard because when you've been hurt, why would you keep opening yourself up, right? If I've opened myself up and I was vulnerable in some way and I was hurt, then why would I keep doing that to myself? So I retreat and I retreat and I retreat. And pretty soon I live way outside of Whoville all by myself. But here's our first clue that the Grinch really isn't just a terrible person or a terrible being, whatever he's supposed to be. He's a mean one. He's a nasty one. He's a heel. There's all these words. And unfortunately, sometimes that is how people who are triggered are seen, because they are prickly, because they are uncomfortable, because they are avoidant, whatever all of those things are. But the Grinch doesn't live alone. The Grinch lives with his dog, Max. The Grinch still craves love, however terrible he is to Max at the beginning of the story. The Grinch has found a companion who loves him unconditionally, which is exactly what the Grinch needs. And the Grinch may not be able to express his love, at least not at the beginning of the story, but he wants that companionship. He has a dog. And how many people who are sensitive, who are empaths, who are victims of trauma, find it easier to be around animals than people? Because in a lot of ways, animals are more predictable. Emotionally, they are for sure. Maybe not, physically sometimes, but that's our first clue that underneath this prickly exterior, there's still hope for the Grinch, right? He's living by himself. He's prickly, he's mean, but he's got a dog. So why does the Grinch decide to steal Christmas? let's talk about that a little bit through the lens of trauma. So the Grinch comes up with this idea. He hates the Who's down in Whoville. He hears their song. It's irritating to him. He hates the whole idea of Christmas. He hates how happy they are. Bingo. He hates how happy they are because, have you ever heard the saying, misery loves company? So a lot of times when we are feeling miserable, when we are feeling unhappy, when we are feeling triggered, it's really hard to see people around you who are happy when you're in that state. And sometimes the natural response to that is to try to share that misery. That's where that misery loves company. And I'm sure everybody's had an encounter before. It used to happen to me all the time when I was an ultrasound tech. You know, somebody comes in and they're in pain and they're unhappy and they're just trying to bring you there with them, right? And as somebody who practices a spiritual practice and energy work, our goal is to not take that personally and to hold a safe space for that person so maybe they can let go of a little bit of that feeling of misery rather than allowing ourselves to pick that up. And sometimes we do pick it up. It just happens. And that's why we do practices like grounding and clearing and kind of letting go of energy that's not serving us, because sometimes we do pick up energy from other people. So the Grinch was miserable. He wanted everybody else to be miserable. He wanted to see himself reflected in those around him. So he decided he was going to steal Christmas. I'm going to take their joy, this visible representation of joy. I'm going to take that away. I'm going to remove their joy. I'm going to physically remove it, you know, this sign of their joy. And so he decides that he's going to go down to Whoville. He's going to sneak in there in the middle of the night. He's going to take all of their stuff. He's going to take the trees. And if you walk, takes everything, takes the pictures hanging off the wall. He just pretty much robs them blind. He takes all of their Christmas, you know, presents, and he takes all their decorations. But he has this encounter with little Cindy Lou Who. And as I was thinking about this in the terminology that we talk about and through the process that I share all the time called spiritual processing, which you can read more about at paulataylorenergy.com. It's the most recent blog post on the homepage. It's a 4-step process. We've talked about it many, many times. And the first step in spiritual awareness, in most spiritual practices, is awareness. Recognizing that you're triggered. And then the second step is that mental processing. Oh, I'm triggered. I wonder why. Kind of understanding. And so what happens is the Grinch encounters Cindy Lou Who, and she's so sweet and kind to him. She's so innocent. And it kind of plants a seed of doubt in him. It plants that seed of awareness. He may not be consciously aware. It's kind of that mental processing is running in his subconscious, but there's a little bit of a like, you know, is this really what I want to be doing? Is this really how I want to be treating people? And that happens to us all the time. Sometimes we know we're triggered. We realize we're responding in a way we don't want to respond that way. We don't want to react that way. We want to choose a response that's calmer or more loving. But when we're fully triggered, we just can't. So in that moment, that kind of seed is planted. The first 2 steps of spiritual processing start happening. But what's the most important step of spiritual processing? It's that physical, energetic release. And we're going to get to that because this part, like it really, when I say it literally blew my mind, obviously it's not possible because I'd be dead, but it blew my mind figuratively. It blew my mind when I realized where that release came from. So the Grinch finishes up, he takes all the stuff and he scurries back up to his mountain, right? And he's watching what's going to happen. He's excited to see that he's stolen these people's joy. They're going to feel as miserable as he is because misery loves company, because everybody loves company. Everybody wants to be understood. Whether you're happy, whether you're sad, whether you're miserable, everybody wants to be understood. Everybody wants to be seen. And so this is really, you know, unconsciously, subconsciously, the Grinch, he just wants to be understood. He wants someone else to know how bad he really feels. So he steals Christmas, right? And then the Who's wake up and they notice everything's gone. And what do? They celebrate anyway. And this is the part of the story that I really wanted to see. Like, when does the Grinch's heart actually grow 3 sizes? Where does this happen? Like, literally, where in the story does this happen? And this is the part that blew my mind. So the Grinch is watching, and the Who's go down to their tree, and they're standing there, and they're singing, right? They start singing. And there's a few things happening at once. There's movement happening because the sled starts falling back down the mountain. So he's trying to rescue the sled so it doesn't fall back down the mountain. And then Max is in danger, and he's rescuing Max, right? Because Max is his companion. As mean as he seems to be, he loves Max. He needs Max. So this is kind of what's happening physically. He's doing some actual physical movement, which we've talked about in terms of release. But what is the moment when his heart actually grows 3 sizes? Because this is the part that just like, whew, blew my mind. It's the song. The Who's are singing. And you might ask, well, he's heard the Who singing every year. That's part of the reason he stole Christmas. Why would it be different? Why is it different in this moment? Why does this song come into his heart and allow it to release the trauma so that it has the space to grow 3 sizes? What is the actual mechanics of this? Because the fact that it was sound healing is what blew my mind. That is what allowed the Grinch's heart to grow. And it's because he was in a different state of receptivity, because he had that encounter with Cindy Lou Who that planted that seed of awareness. It started the subconscious mind. Is this really what I want to do? Is this really what Christmas is all about? And they show that mental processing in this moment. There's a lot of things happening, and he starts thinking, what is Christmas all about? They didn't get any of their things, and they're still singing anyway. So that mental processing is happening. He's physically kind of struggling to pull that sled back to rescue his dog. And all of a sudden the song comes in. And because he's in a different state of receptivity, it allows that heart space to shift. It's the actual vibration of the sound is what allowed his heart to grow 3 sizes. It's because he started that process, however unknowingly, by reaching out. He reached out to the Who's. He wouldn't think of it that way. He thought he was stealing from them. But he reached out to the Who's. He had an encounter with someone. It started this process. And in that moment, he was able to physically, energetically release that trauma from his body, from his energetic field, to make room for his heart to grow 3 sizes. And it did. And the most important part that's the part that blew my mind. I mean, I had to watch it like 3 or 4 times. I had to keep rewinding because I was like, seriously? It was seriously sound healing that healed the Grinch. Oh my gosh, I got very excited by this. The song came into his heart, and because he was receptive, it shifted that energy. But that's not the end of the story, because he's had this massive shift now, but the shame is still there. Shame and trauma go hand in hand. And what is shame is about hiding. That's why vulnerability is the antidote for shame, because vulnerability is about coming out of hiding. So shame tells you, I can't let anybody see. I can't let anybody see my trauma. I can't let anybody see myself. I'm going to hide out in this cave outside of town so no one sees me because of my shame. So as this process of release happened, as this energetic shift happened for the Grinch, the next step was to overcome his shame. And he had to do that by being vulnerable. And so he brought everything back to the Who's. And if you think about the courage that took to bring the stuff back and say, hey, I took this, and he didn't know. I mean, maybe they were going to lynch him. Maybe they were going to put him in jail. Like, this is the Dr. Seuss story, so that didn't happen. This is a story about redemption, so that didn't happen. But it was possible. It's possible that he brought all of that stuff back and they completely reject him. And they say, no, you're a mean one, Mr. Grinch. You're nasty. We don't want you around. But that's not what happened, is it? What happened was they greeted him with space, with love, with compassion, with understanding, because they were in that energy. They were singing. They were creating those vibrations of love. So when he came back and he said, I took your things, I'm sorry, they said, come and join us. Come and join our celebration. You don't have to be alone anymore. They allowed him, to be vulnerable They allowed him to show his shame, and they accepted him anyway. That's all anybody really wants. That's how we overcome trauma. We become aware that we're triggered. We mentally process it. We do the energetic, physical release work, which oftentimes requires help. In the Grinch's case, it required that sound healing to come in, and it requires willingness. It requires the receptivity, because how many times had he heard that song before? Tens of 20s of 30s, however many times. Maybe for 25 years he heard that song, and it never did anything till the moment he was ready. We've got to be ready. We've got to be willing. And you never know what that moment of vulnerability that he had with Cindy Lou Who, where he saw how she was so vulnerable and unashamed. And that was the seed that was planted in him to allow that receptivity, so that when the song came that he had heard, however many times before, it was a complete shift. That's one of the reasons I talk about how much I love sound healing, because it works beyond that mental space. Yes, a lot of times we need that mental processing. We need the awareness. We've got to do some work to get to that receptivity. But when we step into it, our body knows what to do. Our energetic field wants to be open. It doesn't want to be constricted. It doesn't want to be in fear. It doesn't want to be in shame. It wants to be open. It wants to be loving. It wants to be vulnerable. So being vulnerable with someone is often the greatest gift you can give them and yourself. Because when the Grinch finally let himself be vulnerable, he brought those things back at the risk of being completely rejected. And he was gathered in and greeted with love and made part of the community. It's leaving me a little bit speechless. I was really excited to do this and to go through this, and I've been thinking through it, but this is the first time I've really talked through the story. Man, what a profound story. I mean, it's a story almost everybody knows. And on the surface, it's a story about redemption. It's a story about, the meaning of Christmas or the holidays. It doesn't have to be just Christmas. It happens to be, but the meaning of the holidays beyond like a commercialization of them, for sure. That's kind of like a surface level. But if you look underneath, if you look at that with that lens of trauma, it's a really powerful story of overcoming trauma, of redemption from that shame that tells us we need to stay hidden, that keeps us in our cave, that keeps us prickly and keeps people writing songs about us saying we're a mean one. And of course, not everybody comes out that way. Not everybody who's traumatized comes out as being prickly or mean or unapproachable. Sometimes it's complete avoidance, and there's both in this story. Sometimes it's just, you won't see me at all. I'm going to play so small. I'm going to hide so much that you won't ever see me. Because if I let you see me, I show that shame. I open that vulnerability, and then I put myself out there in a way. I risk so much, because if you've been traumatized, if the Grinch had gone through all that and he'd risked all that and they'd rejected him again, he may never have left his cave again. Or maybe that shift would be so profound that he would recognize, I'm not in the right environment for me. Because that's something that's worth mentioning. The Grinch was lucky because he came into a situation that was about love and openness and joy. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes we end up in the same kind of toxic situation, in the same toxic environment we've been in. And it's not appropriate to be vulnerable in that environment, because that's where the vulnerability is used against us. However, when we are, I was going to say evolved, that sounds kind of snooty. When we are recovered enough, when we have overcome enough of our trauma frequency, we might deliberately go into a space like that and be open and be vulnerable and recognize that nothing that's happening is to be taken personally. You are dealing with someone else who is triggered. in their trauma. That is what toxic really means. And so they're triggered, and then you're triggered, and then they're triggered, and that's how things escalate. And so to be the person who comes into that situation and says, no, I'm not going to be triggered. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to hold space. I'm going to protect myself by all means. I'm not going to stay and be abused in any way. But sometimes you could be the Cindy Lou Who for someone else. You could be the innocent, vulnerable being who walks into a toxic situation where the Grinch is triggered and stealing Christmas. And just by being yourself, you could plant that seed for a complete shift. That is why I do the work that I do. And I'm lucky because people come to me and they're looking for help, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you're receptive. It's a step, right? It doesn't mean you've done the work to kind of open, because that for sure happens. But to be able to do that in a situation that's not about healing. Like so many of us get really triggered by our families, right? Or our closest circle of friends or acquaintances, family, the people that are closest to us. There's a reason they know how to trigger us. They're the closest to us. They're the ones we've been the most vulnerable with. And that's where the most healing can happen. And it's not always a two-way street. You might be the Cindy Lou Who just walked in and said, oh, Santa, what are you up to? And just let your light shine. And that alone plants the seed. And whether that person tends the garden and grows the seed and shifts like the Grinch did in that story, that's out of our control. We can only focus on ourselves. But spreading that light and that love, if the Who's hadn't been standing, the Who's could have reacted differently. They could have said, oh, he stole my Christmas. And, they could have gone right into the misery with him. And that's what he thought he wanted. Consciously, that's what he thought he wanted. That's not what he needed. And somewhere on some level, he realized that. And even reaching out by stealing. How many years did he live out there without ever making contact at all? How many movies have you seen where the cranky neighbor starts out and they're really cranky, and then eventually it turns out that they're the cranky neighbor with the heart of gold, right? Because they've been hurt. It's a similar story. So, for today's meditation, I keep saying tonight, whatever. You might be listening or watching this at night, might be during the day, might be in the morning. For this meditation, we're going to work a little bit with that shame. And I think we're going to do some more episodes about shame, because this has been coming up a lot recently with the people I'm working with in my personal life, with my friends. Just had a really good conversation about it with my friend the other day. And it's so uncomfortable. And it wants to stay hidden. And it's really good at it. It's really good at staying hidden, shame. And it's really good at telling you should stay hidden, and telling you should stay small, and telling you should dim your light. And the antidote to that, first of all, again, is awareness. If you don't know what's happening, it might just feel like a part of you. It might just feel like it's always been there. But when you start shining a light into that, cowering figure of shame in the corner, you invite it to come into your Whoville. You invite it to come into your song. So we're going to do some really nice sound healing tonight. And we're just going to check in with our shame. And we're going to invite our shame to receive. And it might be helpful to see your shame as like a little inner version of you, or a little like shame monster, you could see your shame as the Grinch. That works out really well as a metaphor, since we just went through that whole story. So the Grinch just needed to be offered love when he was receptive. So we're going to offer our shame some love. And it may or may not be receptive. It may take multiple times. You might say, I don't have any shame. I don't know what you're talking about. I had that experience earlier. Not that I didn't think I had any. I knew I had shame, but I didn't realize I had shame around a particular issue until I was talking about it with someone earlier today. And I was like getting so uncomfortable, more and more and more uncomfortable. And like, why do I feel so uncomfortable? And why do I feel like I want to literally like hide behind something? That is shame. When you feel like you want to hide, that is shame. When the last thing you want to do is be honest about something, that is shame. And I heard someone describe it one time as Guilt is feeling bad about something you did, like you did something wrong. You feel bad about the action. Shame is feeling bad about who you are. Shame is telling you that you are wrong. There is something about you that's wrong. And so much of our cultural programming is about shame, is about not being okay with who you are, is about fitting into some tiny little mold that somebody somewhere decided was the way we should be, right? And so to those of us who are like me later in life, realizing we've got neurodivergence, there's something going on that we were hiding in shame for years. That's this morning I was getting, I'm getting uncomfortable. I was getting diagnosed with ADHD. I'm just going to say it. I'm probably going to talk about that more coming up. And for some reason, I had a lot of shame around that. I did not want to accept that label, even though I knew it was a thing. I thought I had I had masked it very well for many years because I was raised in a period of time when it was like, sit at your desk and be quiet, no moving, right? And I wanted to be a good girl. So that wanting to be a good girl, being a people pleaser caused me to mask these other kind of neurodivergent aspects of myself, my sensory sensitivities, my intuitive sensitivities, my empathic sensitivities, and this sort of executive dysfunction disorder that I would have sworn to the grave I did not have. I have it. And that vulnerability right there, I just attacked my shame by saying it publicly to whoever's watching, whoever's going to see this. I was uncomfortable in the moment, and now that it's out there, it's like the infertility. I had so much shame about my infertility until I finally started talking about it, and I realized there's nothing to be ashamed of. There is nothing to be ashamed of. We are who we are. We are made exactly the way we are meant to be made. I was meant to be infertile for whatever reason. I have no shame about that anymore, but it took me a long, winding road to get to the point where I could say that. I have ADHD, and it took me a long, winding road to admit that even to myself. So, shining a light on the shame, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, the best place to do it is in a safe meditative state. That's why I love meditation so much. That's why I love energy work. That's why I love sound healing, because all of those are going to tell the body you're safe. It's okay to feel safe, because that's when that shift happens. That's when that space opens up. That's when we release that baggage. It's just like decluttering a house. I can't put more in my closet if it's stacked full of stuff. I got to release some old stuff to put in new stuff. So this is really a process of uncovering and release. When I talk about change, yes, we're changing, we're shifting. We're really becoming more of who we really are. We're becoming more of who we were meant to be. It's a shedding of that frequency. It's a shedding of that hiding that we've done for however many years we've been alive. Everybody's got it. We've got cultural programming. We've got, programming around gender and sexuality and race and ableism. Are you disabled? Are you able? What does that even mean? Around this neurodivergence, around ADHD. I mean, literally name anything, and there is cultural programming about the way we quote unquote should be. And it's time to let go of that, because we're meant to be unique. We're not meant to be the same. The Grinch doesn't look like anyone else in Whoville, and look at that, they accepted him anyway. I could go on about this forever, but I definitely want to do the meditation. So let's meditate together. So let's begin, as we almost always do, with 3 deep oxytocin breaths. We're going to breathe in through the nose, let the belly float out gently but powerfully. And then as you breathe out, you're going to breathe out through the mouth, and you're going to use that audible ha sound to vibrate the vagus nerve to tell the body that it's safe. Ha. a couple more times. And if you feel like you're particularly in your headspace today, we're recording this live video in the middle of the day, so maybe you feel like you need a little extra connection to your body, you can add this grounding ooh at the end of that breath, and that kind of brings you back down more fully into the body. Ooh. It's just kind of a guttural ooh sound. And it can be uncomfortable at first. It can feel really vulnerable to make that sound. So allow yourself the freedom, the safety to be a little vulnerable and try it and see how it feels. Let's do that once more. Ooh. That was a good one. I felt that go all the way down into the earth through my kind of pelvic floor and my feet. So for this meditation, try to have some part of your body contacting the ground if you can. If you're sitting up, maybe your feet are on the ground, maybe your bottom is on the ground, if you're lying on the ground. And just keep coming back to that oxytocin breath anytime you feel you need to, and add that grounding oomph anytime you feel you need to. Whenever we deal with shame, we can get really triggered really quickly. We can get really uncomfortable really quickly. So at any point here, we're going to do this really gently. This is a gentle introduction, meeting your shame. But at any point, if it gets to be too much, come back to the breath. Move your body a little bit. Maybe shake your limbs. Get up and walk around if you need to. But do come back. Even if it's just to sit and breathe, even if you're not actively participating, just allowing the vibration of my words and the sound healing I'm going to share is going to start planting that seed of releasing that shame around whatever you're holding it around your trauma, around your fear, around your childhood experiences, whatever comes up. So to start with, let's just imagine that we're sitting in the most beautiful, the safest space possible. If you're familiar with this practice, just bring your energetic sanctuary to you now. Hopefully it's starting to feel like a really comfortable, safe space to be in, like an old friend that's kind of wrapping itself around you like a warm, cozy blanket. If you're new to this, you're just sitting in the safest imaginable space, whatever that looks like, whatever that feels like for you. You're still in your body, you haven't left your body, you're bringing that space to you. And you're just feeling really safe, you're feeling really warm and cozy. You know that nothing can hurt you in this space, it's a completely safe space. And as you're ready, you might take another couple deep breaths, move your body around a little bit, but as you feel like you're ready, I want you to picture your shame. And I want you to picture this as something separate from yourself, because your shame, it is living in you, it's living in your feelings, but it's not part of who you are. And I think a lot of times we've lost that idea. It feels like a part of who we are. So let's see it as something separate. You can see it as the Grinch. You can see it as a little monster. You can see it as the childlike version of yourself. Whatever comes to you here, you can see it as a stuffed animal or any type of animal. Whatever comes to you here intuitively is right for you. Whatever feels good, whatever feels safe. Because again, this is a topic that can be very quickly escalate to something that feels really uncomfortable. So the first step is just to look at it. What does it look like? Does it look really scary? Maybe it feels really gigantic. And in that case, the first thing you're going to say is like, hey, let's just shrink you down, because you have the power in this space. So like those old shrinky dinks you put in the oven that would shrink when they got hot, you're just going to shrink your shame down. So if it feels like a big overpowering monster, just make it a little tiny monster. And you're looking at it, it's in the corner. It's not right next to you. It's not on you. It's not in you. It's separate from you. And if you're outside, maybe you don't see a corner of a room, but just place it a little bit of a ways away from you. However far feels safe. So you might say, oh, it's on the other side of the world. That's fine as long as you can see it. Maybe you've got a telescope. And just just first of all, notice what it looks like. Notice what your shame looks like. Notice what it feels like. Maybe it's like making faces and grumbling and drooling and, maybe it just seems really gross and terrible. Maybe it just seems really sad. Just notice what it looks like. Maybe you're having a hard time even seeing it, and that's okay too. You can just kind of insert a little blank space there. TBD, to be determined, because you may not be ready to go further into this exercise, and that's completely fine. That's completely fine. Come back to this. But just go as far as feels slightly uncomfortable. We want to challenge ourselves. We want a little bit of discomfort. But if we get too uncomfortable, if we start getting scared, if we start getting triggered, we can't make the change. We can't be receptive to the sound healing. So we want to be in that safe space. So if this feels like enough for you, you're like, yep, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. This is not quite feeling right. Just stay here, looking at your shame. Take deep breaths as you need to. As we step into the sound healing, that those vibrations will invite some shift. There's no need to go further unless you'd like to. If you'd like to progress, then maybe you come a little closer to your shame. You take a few steps toward it. Don't make it come toward you, because it's cowering. It doesn't want to move. It's fear. It is very potent fear. So you're taking a couple of steps toward it, getting a little closer. And that's the practice here is how close can we get to it with the goal of kind of wrapping this shame in love. If that doesn't feel accessible to you today, that's completely fine. Come back and progress through these steps as you feel comfortable. If you feel like you're ready to move forward, just keep closing the gap, closing the distance between you and your shame. And if you need to stop at any point, stop and breathe and decide, do you want to keep going further? Do you want to stay here? There's no judgment here. Release any judgment that comes up about this. The shame wants you to be in that state of judgment because it doesn't want to be seen. That's why it's hiding. So stepping into judgment doesn't serve you here. It doesn't serve this shift that we're looking for. So stop wherever you need to, but if you feel like you can come right up to your shame and you're right next to it, then just kind of experimentally reach out and maybe place a hand on it. And again, that might be like, oof, not today, and that's completely fine. Then just step back to where you feel a little bit uncomfortable but not triggered. If you need to step all the way back, if you need to breathe or move, just do what you need to do to take care of yourself here. The most important thing is to stay in this easeful state, in this calm state, in this observer state, because that is where we'll receive the greatest shift as we bring the energy in. So last step here, if you're ready for it, either just with a hand on your shame, or if you're really all the way ready to kind of embrace this shame monster, give it a big hug if you can, or just put your hand on it and send the intention of love. And if you're far away, you can still send this intention of love if you're there. If you're not, that's completely fine. But maybe you picture yourself beaming out some love like a Care Bear gets coming out of your belly. Maybe you just place a hand on it. Maybe you're full on embracing your shame. You're giving it kisses and love and telling it it's okay. It doesn't need to be afraid anymore. And it might be helpful at this point, and you might look again at your shame. If you're giving a lot of love to your shame and it started out looking kind of like a monster, all of a sudden you might see that it's just a little version of you. Or it's just a defenseless little kitten or puppy or baby animal. This shame feels really scary because it's such a potent concentration of fear, but it's really just a potent concentration of fear. And the antidote for fear is love. So the more love we beam into this shame, the more beautiful the shame starts to become, the less it feels like it needs to hide. Maybe it's like dancing a little bit. It's feeling good. Maybe it wants a spotlight on it. Whatever comes up here, again, stop wherever you need to. Let whatever kind of imagery comes in be intuitive. But keep sending that love. We're going to do some sound. We're going to send some love with the sound. And just interact with your shame monster here in whatever way feels Again, slightly uncomfortable, like you're pushing the envelope a little bit, but you're still safe. You're still at ease. And release the judgment about where you think you should be and just be where you are. Hey, how say how you are safe. You are loved. It is safe to be vulnerable. It is safe to be seen. You are loved. You are safe. You are exactly as you are meant to be in your divine form. Ooh, yeah, 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 yeah. Saye oh hi, saye oh eh oh eh oh eh oh. Say I oh. Hi ho yeah yeah oh eh oh. Say how. Say how, say how, say how. For the last few moments here, see that little shame monster with as much love as you possibly can. Notice that maybe the monster part of it was just a suit. And then underneath it was just a little tiny childlike version of you, or childlike cuddly animal that just needs love, that just needs to be seen and recognized and told you are exactly as you are meant to be. There is nothing wrong with you. You are so loved exactly as you are. And anytime you hear differently, that's just another triggered trauma fear being projected onto you. You are exactly as you are meant to be. The truth of your identity is that you are of the divine source that is the source of all things, and so you are exactly as you are meant to be. As you're ready now, with love, being ever so gentle, start to step away from your shame. Or perhaps you draw it fully into you and just let it be loved. Let it become a beautiful part of yourself you're willing to show the world. And if you're not there, then just leave it in a loving space. Maybe leave it a really comfortable place to be. Leave it a beautiful blanket or comfy, cozy couch and a fireplace. Whatever comes to you, leave it on the beach or in the mountains. Leave it in a space where it is surrounded by love, even if you're not here to beam that love. Let that energy of transformative love stay with your shame as you come back fully to yourself here. You can release that energetic sanctuary or keep it with you for the rest of today or this evening. But do take 3 more of those deep, beautiful oxytocin breaths, adding that grounding oomph if you feel called to. Sat Nam, the truth of your identity is divine. The truth of your identity is that you are exactly as you were meant to be. The truth of your identity is there is nothing to be ashamed of. You are loved exactly for who you are. Sat Nam. As you're ready, begin to wiggle your fingers and your toes, move your body around a little bit, and then affirm with me out loud if possible, I am fully present in my body. I am fully present in my body, and I am exactly as I am meant to be. I am fully present in my body, and I release any shame about who I am. I am loved. I am loved. I am so loved. And as you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for joining me. Please come back to this practice. I know I will. This is a really powerful story to understand how we can overcome trauma. And it was a powerful invitation in the meditation to begin to introduce that shift, to plant that seed, to allow ourselves to be seen and release that shame so that we can overcome the things that are still holding us back, those doubts about ourselves, those feelings that there's something wrong with us. It's just not true. Have a beautiful rest of your week. Have a beautiful holiday season if you are celebrating one of the many holidays going on right now. And I will see you either next week or next year for our next Wind Down Wednesdays.